Three, two. All right. Well, hi, families, and welcome to Family Weekend. We are so excited to be with you here today. We did a series of Q&As all summer long to kind of help our families get oriented and get all of the questions that they needed answered. And so we are bringing that back for Fall Family Weekend because we know that you all still have questions and want an update on some of the things that we talked about this summer. And so tonight, I'm actually joined by Dr. Byron Hughes, our Dean of Students. And so I'm going to have him introduce himself, tell you a little bit about him, and then we're going to get started with some of your questions. As always, you can put your questions in the chat, but we're going to first go through some questions that were pre-submitted.
All right. Hey, Jonathan, good to see you, and certainly good to be with all you families this evening. And welcome to Family Fall Weekend, our Fall Family Weekend. It is always a wonderful time when we get to invite our families into Blacksburg, into Virginia Tech. This year, of course, we're having to do it virtually. So we are certainly feel like you are here with us in spirit if you didn't actually decide to just make the trip on down. But my name is Byron Hughes, as Jonathan has said, and I get the awesome opportunity to serve all of our community, our students and our faculty, our staff, our alumni, our families as Dean of Students. I have been here since 2008. I've been a resident here at Blacksburg and Virginia Tech that entire time, and have been in a few different roles here within student life at the university, but have been in my current role now for it might be 2 years like yesterday, Jonathan. I think it is actually 2 years yesterday that I think about it. Of course, it feels a lot longer given COVID, but again, still nonetheless excited and very much thrilled to be here with you all this evening. And again, know that you all still have many questions and we want to be able to help you out as much as we can. But again, want to pause and say, hooray, congratulations. We have made it to the mid-semester point just about. And we are certainly looking forward to continuing the semester as strong as we got started.
That's awesome. I'm glad that you're here with me this evening. I know lots of people are gonna put some questions in there for you, but our first one is really about what are the plans for fall break, and is it still happening, and what does my student need to do to be prepared?
So fall break is still happening. I believe that's the 16th, 17th. Jonathan, you can correct me. I think it's hard to know when it is, but it is actually in a couple of weekends. It is still happening. So classes will not be scheduled on the Thursday and Friday of that weekend. The difference between fall break this year than as opposed to years before is in the years before, we would certainly encourage our students to take the break, take the long weekend, get away from Blacksburg, either go to, where home might be for you or go see friends. And that's usually what a lot of times students have done during that first fall break. But we would say, of course, this year is just take the time to relax here in Blacksburg, relax with your friends, relax with your pod, relax and just be here and not have to do schoolwork during those 4 days that we have for fall break. But again, it isn't a time that we would encourage our students to leave Blacksburg, and we would not encourage certainly their friends to come to Blacksburg to visit, just take the pause and take the break. But yes, it's still on, and we still have to give you the opportunity to take a break from school at about that mid-semester point, like we said, and to be able to kind of catch up and catch your breath a little bit before we kind of move forward to finish out the rest of the semester.
That's actually really helpful because that's going to lead me to my next question. But just to make sure that we give them the right information, fall break is October 16th. I did a quick search while Dr. Hughes was talking, but I want to make sure we share that information. So October 16th, 2 weeks from today. But you were talking about how it's important for our students to take a break. And so one of the things that our families are wanting to know is how is Virginia Tech prioritizing the mental health of our students, particularly some of our first year students who may be feeling like it's hard to connect and trying to find that way. And also knowing that like our students who are returning are also kind of experiencing some of that mental anguish. And so how is Virginia Tech kind of prioritizing that?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is, we know this is a hard semester. It's even harder when there are so many restrictions that are in place for how people engage with each other. And those aren't just our restrictions. Those are restrictions from the Commonwealth of Virginia, the town of Blacksburg, and certainly what Virginia Tech has put in place as well. And we know that so many people have been living in this way of life since March, just about when things really started to shut down. So, Virginia Tech continues to prioritize mental health the way that we always have. Our Cook counseling is still available, even though they may not do it in person. It's going to be telecounseling, and they are still available. Their offices are still open. They've moved from McComas Hall where they were previously, and they've moved into a temporary location while we do some renovations in McComas. So they're now actually over in Oak Lane. And the good news about that too is that they're a little bit more accessible parking wise too, if someone has to visit them in person. But again, they're doing those services certainly via telecounseling. Recreational sports and Hokie Wellness are the other two functions within that health and well-being area that are also thinking about mental health. And I think it's always important that we help folks understand that Cook Counseling is definitely an awesome and a great opportunity to be able to speak with someone about how you're doing. But Rec Sports and Hokie Wellness are also providing programming still. And some of their programming actually is in person, and some of their programming is going to be virtual as well. So to be able to tap into those programs as the opportunity to get a release. The other way is just simply to do it the old-fashioned way, which is to get outside and take a walk, and you can take a walk with people, you can take a walk by yourselves. And this time of year is amazing in Blacksburg because we have kind of passed over the really hot days and we haven't really gotten to the cold days yet. So to be able to get outside and take a walk on the Huckleberry Trail, to walk around campus, to go for a run if that's what you do, or just simply to go someplace, again, even if it's with friends and other people that in addition to just simply, we are here. The Dean of Students office is still available and still able to meet with people, whether it be virtually, actually, or in person. We want to be able to hear from people. Our academic advisors are also still very present for students to be able to talk to them. So the key thing is that we have people that are here that want to be able to engage with student, and so that they don't necessarily have to bottle up how they're feeling. We also know it's hard for our residential students, particularly that might have most of their classes online and are spending all day long probably in a room alongside a roommate who is also doing the same thing. So even in those scenarios, we say, get out of the room, get out of the room and actually study someplace else. You can go to the library, you can find an empty classroom on campus and you can study there as well. A lot of our upperclassmen students are aware of that. Again, since we're still in a very kind of warmish and cool time on campus, also being able to go outside and do the same thing. So we're still prioritizing it. We still care. Our support is still available. Again, that support may not always be in person. It might be virtually. But again, we still want to be able to help, and we still want to be able to lay the pathways really for people to feel like they can be healthy and that they can thrive.
Yeah, that's really great. I can definitely attest that this is my first fall in Virginia, and the weather is beautiful. I have been walking around, and a lot of our students have been walking around, and I'm really excited that a lot of them are wearing masks. And so that it's been really great to see the students really enjoying this weather and just being outside with their friends. I think it makes things feel a little bit more normal.
It really does.
The next question that our families are wanting to know is, what are we doing for students in quarantine? And can their families do extra things to kind of help them feel connected and not as isolated?
Yeah, absolutely. We put plans together this summer for quarantine and isolation for those that decide to remain on campus and don't have another option of where they can go off campus, whether that be off campus here or off campus wherever home might be or wherever they, again, choose to be. And so we put together a plan then, and then obviously that plan had to scale up as soon as we got more and more students going into quarantine and isolation. And so now we have a pretty strong support networking system in place for people that are calling in. And we've got a group called a care and support team that's actually making daily calls to people that are in quarantine and isolation, just as a courtesy call. How's it going? What do you need today? Is there anything that I can help you with that someone else has not been able to help you with? We have isolation assistance. So that's a variation on the term of resident assistants. So normally in the other residence halls, we have resident assistants who live with students. We have a group of students that we've actually hired on as isolation assistants. So they're doing what an RA would do. They're not living necessarily in the building with them, but they're doing what an RA would do, as in they're staying connected to them. They're getting them items and the things that they need. If a student has a package that's mailed to them, that's mailed to, anywhere here on campus, it will make its way to the housing office in Newhall West, and then the housing office will utilize these isolation assistants to get those packages to students if they need them. But again, we're checking in with them. We're reminding them that Shifford Health Center is available to them, that on-call nurses are actually available in the evenings and on the weekends if their condition should change, if they start feeling bad. So again, we're checking in as much as we possibly can. And Jonathan, I think what we're finding out when we call them is they say, I'm doing okay, and I think it's not as bad as it may seem. But we also know that that's a very different experience of living, maybe alone in that building and not with your things versus, living in your normal residence hall space with all your items and with all of the access that you have to be able to get out and, of course, and do the different things that you want to do. So again, it's not necessarily the most exciting place to be, but it does allow them to still be able to be here, remain in Blacksburg, remain on campus, stay connected in the ways that they need to. We're also sending twice a week to students the listing of virtual programming that's happening so that they can still engage virtually with the programming and the events that are happening, just like they might do if they were back in their permanent residence hall.
Yeah, that's really great. I think that that's something our family members don't necessarily know that we're doing, but it is really important to us to make sure that even though those students are in isolation or quarantining, that they can still get connected and still feel like they're part of our campus. The next question is still about quarantine, but people are wanting to know what happens after the 14 days, after the students have been in isolation. How do they kind of come out of that?
They just leave the room. So they grab their things, they grab whatever they came in with, and they leave behind the linens that are there that we've brought in, and they can leave behind the trash that's there because we will send people in to gather those items. But they just simply bag up their things that they have with them and they take a walk on back to the residence hall. Their access is actually programmed from when they leave their permanent room. Their access is actually programmed so that it will come back on the day that they are allowed to check out of the isolation or quarantine building. There's no return to normal activity permission that's needed. We will have someone that will check in at the end of that quarantine or isolation period just to see what they might need as they're kind of making a transition back into their regular day-to-day, and to make sure there's nothing they might need, particularly academically. But yeah, when that period ends, whenever that period ends, they just simply leave the building and they go back into their regular normal space.
Yeah, I think a good follow-up to that question is are our students who are in quarantine or in isolation still taking classes, and what kind of accommodations are we making for their academics while they're there?
Yeah. So, the pseudo good news, which doesn't always feel like good news, particularly for our families about their students having to take classes online, is that probably, a high percentage of our students that are in isolation that are actually positive for COVID are asymptomatic. So they're still working along, they're still able to do the things that they're able to do. So for many of them, because they're in online classes, they just simply continue what they were doing. They're just doing it in New Hall West, for example. For a student who actually is not able, who has to miss out on an in-person class, a face-to-face class, or a hybrid class where maybe they're doing some face-to-face interactions, the Dean of Students Office can send an absence note to their faculty members to let them know that the student is not able to attend. But we've also, been able to work with faculty, and many of them are actually just simply accommodating the student on their own. So if the student notifies them and says, hey, I'm going to be out for the next 10 days or 14 days, or however long that isolation or quarantine period is, the faculty members are being quite accommodating and saying, okay, that's fine. We will figure out what we can do to kind of allow you to be able to make sure that you can stay on track for the course or for the class. And we'll do what we can. So many times they don't actually need a note from the Dean of Students Office to support them actually being absent from class. If a student is absent from class, a face-to-face or hybrid, and they feel like, gosh, they're just way behind, and let's say also maybe that they are asymptomatic and they're just not feeling well and up to it, then the Dean of Students Office can actually work with your student to try to consider what their options are now that it's time to return to class. We've had some students that have made a decision to either drop a class and they feel like they're just not going to be able to make up their work for, or they've been able to work closely with a faculty member, an academic advisor, or the college dean's office to kind of figure out what their options are to be able, again, to stay on track and do well in the class.
All right, I think that's really helpful for our families to know. And the next question they're asking is, my student is a little worried about being written up for things in their residence halls. And so how do they kind of know what the rules are and how to make sure that they're following them?
Yeah. So one thing to know is that all of the policies that have been put in place in the residence halls are policies that are thinking about public and community health. And that is a primary goal when we're thinking about these policies. We are trying our very best to be able to limit the spread of COVID-19. And, as we've heard from, a few different people, both our chief public health officer here in our region, we also had Dr. Deborah Birx from the White House Coronavirus Task Force on campus here a couple of weeks ago. And both of these public health officials have said, When we think about our college campuses, the places where we're actually seeing zero transmissions really between students or between students to faculty are actually in classroom spaces. It's in classroom spaces and it's in other spaces around campus that are actually structured, meaning we have been able to structure it so that people don't have to be next to each other. We're also obviously looking at masking and making sure people are wearing their masks or wearing some sort of face covering. The places where we really can't manage or control that very well, because again, people live together, or where people live off campus together, or where people are living in residence halls, and we can't necessarily be there, and we don't want to tell roommates to stay 6 feet apart while they're inside a room living together, and we don't have an ability to be able to watch people as they're walking down the hallways and make sure they're 6 feet apart. So there are policies that are obviously put in place in the residence halls truly to be able to limit the number of people that are gathering and coming together, either in their rooms or throughout the hallways or out through lounge spaces. And so we believe that number right now is the magic number 3, where they would say, no more than 3 people in your room, including yourself and potentially a roommate as well, that would be in a room together. Again, all of this is about public health. Now, we are, we know that people are worried and they're thinking about, how am I going to get in trouble? And we have had some students that we've had to actually revoke their housing contracts because they have violated our health and wellness agreement, the agreement that they signed actually when they signed up for housing or re-signed their contract this summer. And in those scenarios, those weren't scenarios where they had 6 people in a room together and then they were considered in violation or not in alignment with our health and policy agreement. Those are scenarios where it was actually, more people than that, along with some other things happening. So for example, alcohol consumption or other disruptive behavior. So again, we're never going to, it's not going to be significant trouble for someone that has 5 people in their room when they're supposed to have 3. Particularly those 5 people are masked and things are being done the right way. So really the safest bet is one, to ask the RA. So the RA is still living on the floor. The RA resident experience is not a virtual experience. That is an in-person experience, meaning, you should be able to walk down the hall and knock on the door of the RA and ask the RA, hey, what are the policies and what are the things that I should be thinking about? Every building is staffed with a professional staff member who works full-time for the university, who actually lives in the building or in a building adjacent to that. And their responsibility is to supervise that RA staff as well as to oversee the experience in that building. Stop by and talk with them and ask them, hey, what are the policies and what do I need to know to make sure that I'm not getting into trouble? But again, all of this is about public health and community health and be able to make sure that we can mitigate the impact of COVID-19, because we know what our students desperately want is they desperately want to be in Blacksburg. They want to be either on campus or off campus, wherever they're living. They want to be here. They want to have their experience here. When I spent time talking with a lot of students between March and May of last spring semester, and I would ask them, how's it going? And, what would really make things better for you right now? They would say, honestly, to be back in Blacksburg. They said, I don't care if I have to do virtual online classes from my bedroom. I would much rather do that in Blacksburg than to do that where I am. So that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to be able to create an opportunity here where people can be together, people can be safe together, and we will not have a significant, impact on our local communities here, Blacksburg, Christiansburg, Radford, the New River Valley. But again, the residence halls are also thinking about that, but certainly on a different kind of level because of the high contact that students have with each other.
All right, family. So as a reminder, while you're listening, and if you're coming up with more questions for Dr. Hughes, make sure you drop those in the comments, because as soon as we finish with our pre-submitted questions, we're going to go to the ones that you all are submitting in the comments. The next question is, my student is kind of struggling to find a pod. So how are students going about creating their pods, and what are some tips you have for that?
Yeah. One thing to know is that your student would probably be struggling to find their pod, whether we had COVID happening or not. So I think that is something that, we know that generally, particularly for our first year students that are living on campus, the expectation when you get to campus is you're walking up and down the hall and there's, doors are open and there's an RA that's programming and 30 or 40 people are coming out together and hanging out with each other. And that naturally friendships are creating that way. And I can tell you from 20 years I've been in higher education, and nearly 10 of them were actually spent in housing and residence life, managing communities and supervising staff and that sort of thing in terms of that experience. even in those scenarios, we still had people that were struggling to find their pods, struggling to find their people, struggling with loneliness. So loneliness is certainly a natural phenomenon for people in general to experience, and it even increases when people are in college. So, really, this is about you. There's still the opportunity to meet people. There are still people that are interacting and engaging with each other. Maybe there isn't the 30 or 40 people that are hanging out in a room together or hang out in a lounge together, but there are still people around. There are still people that are choosing to do things. And as Jonathan said, outdoors right now is amazing. And quite honestly, I'm standing in Burris Hall right now and in my office and looking out on the drill field. And their students are just walking back and forth consistently. And it's 6:00 in the evening right now. And really campus for the most part is kind of shut down in terms of the academic, experience. And so people are just out and about. They're driving around campus, they're hanging out and throwing footballs on the drill field. So those things happen. And so really it's about just Jonathan, I always tell students that you can't meet people that you don't say hi to. So part of this is say hi to people, talk to people, even with a mask on, you can still say hi. It doesn't block your voice. Yes, you can't shake a hand, but you can still, say, hi, my name's Byron. What's your name? That still works even during COVID, even when we don't have the opportunity to bring, 20 or 30 people together for big programming. And again, clubs and organizations are still operational too. So some are actively recruiting right now to find people to join. Others have probably already started programming, and they might be doing that virtually, and they might be doing that in person. But even for the virtual experiences that are happening with clubs and organizations, what happens is you go to the virtual event and then you're now part of that club. And then because you're now part of that club, you start to interact with the people there beyond the club meeting. And even if that is via GroupMe or text message or Snapchat or however you're interacting with each other. And then you decide, hey, who wants to go get lunch together? Who wants to get dinner together? And then you do those things together. Or you decide, hey, we're all going to go study together in McBride this evening, until we get kicked out of the building when they have to clean the building. That's how those relationships really start to form. It's not necessarily going to be because we are creating those opportunities. It's because you're actually having to be a little bit more intentional and deliberate, particularly within the COVID scenario, about actually talking to people and engaging people. I talked to one of our first year students that actually is living off campus this fall. He didn't sign up for his housing on time. And so now he's off campus, and he's also trying to figure out, how do I meet people and how do I connect with people? And I told him the same thing. And he said, I would have never thought about that. I've only would have thought of sitting in my room and hoping that it would just occur naturally. And I said, you know what, even under a non-COVID scenario situation, you just sitting in your room doesn't bring people in your room, So how you meet those people is to actually go out and interact with those people and to talk with them and to engage with them. And, and again, is it a little bit harder right now? Sure it is. But I don't necessarily know that any policies in our residence halls, if that's where you're living, or any policies out in town about how many people can be together, that really shouldn't be a deterrent from how you can start to interact and engage with people. Again, it just is going to take a little bit more intentionality on the parts of students to be able to know that. And again, if it is a hard time, come talk to us in the Dean of Students office. I have a full group of people over there that are willing to engage and sit down and strategize with your student about what they can do to meet people. If they live on campus, talk with the RA. The RA is always interested in being able to engage, again, your student, to be able to help them out and think about things. If they are going through and they're working with co-counseling, talk to your counselor, about, what are some options and what are some strategies. If it's going to work out, for example, at McComas, you can still talk to people, even if we don't want you to necessarily be next to each other while you're working out. Gosh, when you're leaving the building, we don't expect you to not interact with each other. So talk to each other. If you've spent the past 35 minutes navigating different machines within McComas, and now you're leaving at the same time, have a conversation. The conversation is what leads to the friendship.
I think it's really important that you talk about how this is something that may already be happening with our student, whether we had COVID or not. And I think when I think about first year students, because, that's what New Student and Family Programs really focuses on for our student portion is to think about how this is the first time that a lot of our students have had to make friends on their own, right? A lot of them have really lived with the same people for their entire life, and they've not had to make friends in a long time. And I had a conversation with one of our grad students about the same thing, that they've not had to make friends in a long time. They've always been given to them. And I think this is a challenge for our students to think about, like, what do I do to actually take that next step and to make those friends?
Yeah. Again, I just, Jonathan, I cannot underscore enough that the friendship and loneliness factor would be happening just as much if we weren't under COVID. Again, COVID creates a little bit more barriers for people, but again, it would still be happening nonetheless. So just the power of a conversation and an interaction with someone is really truly what starts it. And I've told students that, for years now, and they start, and then they have to, you have to practice it, right? So being social, I've got a couple of colleagues and friends who, work with growing organizations. And, for those of you that watch our Welcome tomorrow morning, you'll hear me talk about this a little bit again then, but they say that, being social is like a muscle. You've got to exercise it. And you got to try it out on people. And so you try it out by just simply talking to people. And here's the great news about a place like Virginia Tech is that there's so many people here that if you try out a conversation with someone and it falls flat and doesn't go anywhere, oh, well, that's fine. There's probably 30 other people that you might see as you're walking throughout campus to be able to get where you're trying to go. So you've got to try out and flex the muscle a little bit, right? And then as soon as you get comfortable with it, you'll find that it's pretty easy. And then the friend making actually will start to happen too.
Yeah, I really love that. The next question is really kind of similar, but also kind of adds a complexity to that. So our families are wanting to know if my student is worried about getting COVID or maybe a little bit more hesitant than some others, what are ways that they can still find to connect?
Wear a mask. So, I think that we're going to start realizing here, COVID's not leaving, our communities in the next several months. Sure, it's going to probably get easier. And there are so many things that we know now about COVID that we didn't know back in March when everybody went into lockdown mode and no one would come out of their homes. And, I was included in that. I mean, my family would stay put. If we needed food, I would venture out and I would be in gloves and masks and everything else and not touch anything. And now we obviously know a whole lot more about this disease than we did then. But what we also know too, and this is coming from the scientists and from the medical folks, is that the masking and the face covering, along with, of course, sanitizing and keeping your hands clean, is a significant way to allow you to be able to still socially interact. It's one of the reasons, Jonathan, why while we don't really say social distancing here at Virginia Tech much, because we don't want you to distance yourself from people so much that you can't have social interactions. So we say physically distance, so we're going to be physically distant from each other, but we still are expected to engage in conversation and relationships. So for the folks that are nervous about getting COVID, you've got to still mask up. And here's the deal. If you interact with people that you feel like they're not making good COVID choices when it comes to masking up, then those aren't the people that you really need to interact with. There will be some other people that are also thinking, I'm always going to wear a mask no matter where I am. So even when I feel like I'm comfortable within my pod, I'm still going to keep the mask on. And that's completely okay. But that's a lifestyle that we have to start to adapt if we're going to be able to make it through the next several months, because we're going to start, particularly once we roll into the spring semester, Jonathan, we're going to start turning the lights back on, in terms of our activity and our interactions with people. And we're going to start to, engage people, and we're going to start to create more in-person experiences and opportunities. And it won't be, most things are virtual and some things are in person. We're going to try to move that needle quite a bit. But in moving that needle, we're not going to say, take off your mask. We're going to say, keep the mask on, but hey, we're going to bring it together. So it'll be possible for you to be closer than 6 feet with someone and still have a mask on and still be okay and know that you're not going to contract COVID. So again, the COVID transmissions that are happening, they're happening because people aren't wearing masks. And they're actually happening more in our pod situations where people feel so comfortable with each other, they think, I don't need to take those precautions anymore. Unfortunately, they don't realize that probably one person in their pod is probably popping from pod to pod to pod. And it's probably around people who are not taking, as many precautions. So again, you got to try it out to the best of your ability and at your comfort level. But again, wearing the mask helps tremendously and does not need to block your opportunity from being able to go out there, obviously, and connect with people.
So I'm going to take a question from the comments because it relates to something you just finished saying. And so one of our family members is hoping you can explain what we mean by pod a little bit better.
Yeah. So pod means the people you're comfortable with, your people. That's what we mean, right? It is, and it could be 3 people, it could be 5 people, it could probably be 10 people. It could even be 15 people, depending upon, what is important to you socially in terms of how you engage and interact with people. But a pod also means the people that you become comfortable enough with. So if Jonathan and I are in a pod, that means we know each other really well. And we also know each other well enough to know that I know that Jonathan is not running around a campus or off campus at different parties and that sort of thing, just not wearing a mask and, doing everything under the sun with people that would most likely have COVID and be contagious for it. So Jonathan and I, along with maybe 3 other of our friends, probably are going to hang out mostly together. So we're going to do most things together. And because we're connected to each other and we're comfortable with each other, it means we're also going to be comfortable enough probably at times to say, well, maybe the mask may not be needed, particularly if we're sitting outside, someplace and it's airy and again, we know each other really well. We might say, maybe the mask is not needed because of who we are and how we're connected. So another way to think about pod might be a family group. So we know that people, for example, that live off campus, if there are 4 of them living together, that's a family group. That is a pod. They're not going to be expected to wear a mask, around each other while they're living in the home together, of course, unless one of them is sick and they are trying to make sure that others don't get sick. But we would never expect them to do that. We would expect them to naturally be with each other. But again, that's because they trust each other well enough to be able to know about the choices that they're making. So it's all about just finding a group of people, sticking with that group of people as much as possible, and not really going into spaces where there's going to be more people than your pod.
Yeah, and I think it's really important that also creating that pod requires that we have some maybe uncomfortable conversations with our friends to ask, like, how are they actually following the policies and guidelines? Because sometimes our students aren't used to doing that, but I do think it's a really important piece of that is to have that conversation with each other.
Yeah, it's a good educational effort, particularly if you're a first-year student and you're going to be looking to move off campus, for example, for your sophomore year. Being able to get into the practice of having uncomfortable conversations and about choices or decisions that your friends might be making is important, because when you're living with roommates next year off campus, you're actually going to have to do that, because it's not like living on campus where we've got people in place to help you work through uncomfortable conversations and help you work through a mediation of things aren't going well. I mean, we certainly have those people that can help you off campus, but on campus, that support network is there and it's built in. Off campus is a lot different. So yeah, going ahead to start working through what it feels like and to actually talk with someone when they're doing something that's making you uncomfortable is pretty important.
Yeah, so one of our next questions is really a pretty technical question, so you'll probably answer this one pretty quickly, but are the students who are in quarantine in the same residence halls that are not quarantined? So are there quarantine and non-quarantine students mixed in the same residence hall? I think
they are not. Nope. So now there are going to be some cases where students might decide I'm quarantining, and it's not because they've actually come in contact with someone directly, so they're not considered a close contact, or in other words, a positive exposure to someone. They just decide, Jonathan and I are friends, and then, Jonathan has another friend and that person has COVID. And I might say, you know what, I'm going to quarantine. I've never been around that person before. And there's a good chance Jonathan has never been around that other person before, but I'm going to quarantine. And so people might be using that language. We may know about those students, and there's a good chance that we may not know about them. Then there's going to be the people that are advised to quarantine by the Shifford Health Center or by the Department of Health, depending upon where they got their test taken. Those students are generally being asked to relocate. And so they're relocating either out of our residence halls completely, or they're relocating into a quarantine building. In some rare scenarios, Shifford Health Center, the medical folks, might advise someone to quarantine in place. And again, why they would do that, I don't necessarily know completely, but I know that is because they have a good feeling and a good understanding about that person's circumstances enough to know. And it's not generally going to be someone who is a positive exposure. It's probably going to be someone who may have some symptoms, and Shifford might believe, well, we've got a negative test and it's not likely that it's COVID, but you know what, still just go ahead and just stay in place and limit your movement so you can still go get food and have food delivered to you. Or have a friend go get food for you using our sick meal policy in the dining centers. But they might say in some of those rare cases, yes, go ahead and stay put in the residence hall. But those aren't going to be scenarios where they believe that there's even a remote chance that person is positive for COVID.
All right, thank you for that explanation. Our next question is an interesting one, so I think you're gonna have to explain something again that we've said a couple of times. But it says, "I came to visit my student, and it doesn't seem like there's much for them to do."
Yeah. So, and I can answer that actually a little bit differently. Here's what we find and what we know is what students enjoy doing and what they want to do sometimes sits on a vastly opposite side of the continuum than maybe what their family wants them to do. So, so we may have tons of things that are happening, but they're not actually interested in doing that. And what they may not say to their family member is, this is what I'm actually interested in doing, because that's something that they're interested in doing may not be the thing that potentially their family wants them to be doing. And in some situations, it might even be things that we wouldn't necessarily say that they should do. So again, that's not to say that there's anything nefarious or wrong about what they're wanting to do. But, for example, I was talking to a student earlier today who said, I know there's not much of an intramural program going on. And so I looked at the intramural page and I saw there's volleyball, there's kickball, there's, like a soccer type of event that they're doing. And there's about 5 other intramural programs that they have in place right now. And again, they're not, it's 4-on-4 volleyball, which you would be playing if you were out in front of Pritchard Hall or over there in that quad area. And so the reason why they're saying that it's not what they want to do is because it's not what they want to do. But again, we know in this COVID scenario, you're going to have to modify the things that you're trying to do. So in any scenario, when it comes to volleyball, it's not going to be normal volleyball numbers. It's going to be scaled back. Maybe basketball, yes, is not going to be allowed where we're going to facilitate an opportunity for people to play basketball with each other, because it's one of the highest contact sports that there are. And the transmission of COVID is very, very likely about playing basketball. But it doesn't mean that we haven't come up with another opportunity. We have a watch party, for example, that's happening tomorrow for the Virginia Tech Duke game. So if, your student says, there's nothing to do for the game tomorrow. Well, Jonathan and I know, Jonathan is sitting in the building where we're going to have students that will be invited, assuming that they've registered, to come and go to the game and watch the game. And they will do what is possible in that room to make sure that pods are physically distanced from each other so people can watch the game. So there's definitely things to do. It's just a matter of what is it that they're wanting to do. So I would encourage families to ask them, what are you looking for truly and honestly? And then, you can get with them. So you all can get on Zoom together and you can, share your screen and you can go to gobblerconnect.vt.edu and start scrolling through all of the opportunities that there are to be involved on campus, and then find out what are they specifically looking for. And if they're specifically looking for something that's not offered, then there's nothing wrong with your student being able to reach out and ask our team, how do we do that? Or how can I make that happen? Or, hey, I'm looking for this and I don't find it. Is it that I'm looking in the wrong place? But I would say that, that's also another thing, Jonathan, that even on the non-COVID scenarios, people always say, even when we have, plenty of in-person things going on, people would say, there's nothing going on. And, for the last academic year, for example, we had a weekends well spent program where various departments around student affairs would sponsor activities and things on campus. And we would still have people and have students saying, yeah, but there's nothing to do. So there are definitely things that are here. There's definitely things here to do. It's just a matter of what are they interested in doing? And is there alignment between what they are interested in doing and what's being offered?
And I think it's important to add that some of the things that they're wanting us to do are things that we've never planned before, or not things that we're allowed to plan, right? Like some of those activities that are really just not university sponsored are just not a lane that we can live in and be responsible with our student.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the next question says, we are concerned about housing for next year. When should our students start looking and what are their options?
So if they're looking off campus, I will say this, and you've heard it from me. Our housing inventory is not going to dry up in the next 3 weeks. So if your student is telling you that if I don't sign a lease in the next 3 weeks, that I will not have a place to live, that is not completely accurate. Now, it is possible that in the next 3 weeks or 4 weeks, they may not be able to get into the newest, shiniest apartment or townhouse, complex that we have here in Blacksburg. But our inventory of housing is plentiful, and so you have several months here to be able to figure this out. Offcampus.vt.edu is a great place to be able to go to be able to find information about what's listed and what's available for living off campus. But it is, first you want to figure out who you want to live with. And that's a very, very, very important decision that you're making, because again, when you move off campus, it's not very easy to go to a landlord or to the rental agency or office and say, I don't like my roommate, can I move? That doesn't really happen in an off-campus scenario. So first you got to figure out with who you want to live with, and then to start thinking about where you want to live and what you're looking for. And again, as I said, that website is one great place to be able to go, but you can start now, but it isn't a necessity to go ahead and make a decision to sign a lease in the next couple of weeks, particularly when you've only been here for about 5 or 6 weeks if you're a first year student. For older students that are here, they certainly have kind of gotten into a rhythm about kind of what they're looking for and what they want. But certainly for our first year students that are looking at their second year, of course, if you're in a living learning program, some of those living learning programs actually have built into the agreement of being part of that program that you actually will get to stay for a second year on campus. But again, a lot of students will like to go ahead and move off campus. And I would say, take your time. Again, you're not going to, even if you're being told and there's a frenzy, it's kind of like, Jonathan, I compare it to fraternity and sorority rush, where everyone feels like, oh my gosh, I got to make this decision to join a fraternity or sorority. I got to make that decision to do this right now, or I will never be able to do it. And that's not completely accurate, right? There's an opportunity to join that experience at any time throughout college. You don't have to make that decision during the first 2 weeks of school. So the same thing happens when it comes to living off campus. Everyone gets caught up in this rush, and I think we have to make this decision because everyone's making a decision. No, what's happening is that they're all making the decision about the newest property or complex in town. They're not making that decision as it relates to random houses or townhouses in town or even apartment complexes that have maybe been here for 10, 15, or 20 years.
Well, so our next question is a question that I think everybody wants to know the answer to, and I'm not even positive that you can answer it, but when can we expect to hear about the spring semester, and what can students and families expect?
So we've already heard, and that is it's on the calendar that we will start whatever that date whatever that date is. So we have not, we're pretty persistent here and insistent on, we need to be able to make this work. Now, again, COVID-19, we have no control over. And if COVID-19 flares back up in a significant kind of way across our country, and particularly in this area, then yeah, that might have an impact on what our spring semester plan is. But as it stands today, and as it stands for right now, we are planning that, all students will go home or go somewhere at the Thanksgiving break. All classes at that point that are not online will shift online, and students that are residential will stay back where they are. And if you live off campus, certainly, you can certainly return. I mean, it's your space, you're paying for a lease. The semester will end as normal, and then we will go off to winter break. And then when winter break is over, we will come back for spring break. So that is still the plan. We've not made any decisions to deviate from that plan. And that's part of the reason, Jonathan, why, we have put into place the random prevalence testing program that we have in place, because that's going to also let us know what's happening with COVID across our student body. And we're going to use a significant, a sample, certainly, of our students. So not every student will likely be invited to be tested. So that small sample will tell us something about, again, what's happening. And that's going to let us also know some things about how many people have, maybe had COVID at some point, particularly within the past 30 to 90 days. So again, all of that is going to be good data to let us know what's really happening in our community, because we know that not every student is being tested on campus. So we'll have better data at that point, but that data will probably confirm what we kind of already know, which is most of the students that are going to get COVID, that would get COVID, likely have probably already gotten it, at this point. And those that would not likely get COVID because of the decisions that they make and the lifestyle that they lead to keep themselves and other people safe, probably will not. So we don't feel that we're in a situation right now where we have to think that we cannot operate in the spring. But again, if numbers flare up across our country, due to the cold season or the winter season, and the same thing happens here regionally within Virginia, then we would be prepared certainly to change that plan, and we would notify people as soon as we know.
All right, our last question that I'm seeing, it says, can you summarize the locations of resources for families to stay connected?
Oh. So one good place is a place that Jonathan here brought to us when he started at Virginia Tech, which is our Hokie Family Hub. Did I get that right? Did I say that right? Okay. And so that is a great, I think, place to be able to go to one location And that hub pulls in information from our academic colleges, from all of our units within student affairs, and then other parts of Virginia Tech. So it's in one place for families to be able to go. And I think what I heard from the team in family programs is about 30,000 families. Is that correct?
35.
35,000 are actually already signed up. So if you're not signed up, you need to get signed up. But that is a great place to be able to get all information in one place. You can also subscribe to our Hokie Family e-news by visiting our family programs website. And that will also give you some information on a weekly basis about what's happening on campus. Certainly, there's a lot of folks that are part of the Facebook group that has been pulled together by volunteers, that is not managed by Virginia Tech and not necessarily connected with Virginia Tech, but it is. We have a great group of parents that actually have volunteered their time. This isn't even working. And Jonathan knows this also. They volunteer their time, and every single day they manage that Facebook group to be able to make sure that people get the information that they might want to have and the support that they have from each other. So I would say absolutely, if you're not in the Hokie Family Hub, that is the best place to be and the best place to be able to start to get all the information. And the cool thing about that too is that the information probably that your students are getting that maybe they're not thinking to tell you because they're not thinking about the things that you might need to know, it's coming directly to you. And so then you can have real conversations with your students. And when you ask them things like, hey, have you heard anything about, when registration or course request is? And if they tell you, yeah, I don't know if I really know, you can say, actually, you do know because I got it off the website that, is available to you. So that's the best place to start, I think, to be able to get a summary of everything that's available to families and what you need to know, certainly to be able to make the academic year work for you as well.
Byron, I really wish I would have made that question up and planted that one, but I really didn't actually ask. But that is exciting because it allows you to talk about the work that that we're doing. And so I'm glad that question was asked. Our last question that I always end with is, what is one thing you want to leave our families with?
Well, we just always value the roles that you all play and being able to help the student experience and help our students. And really when I say our, I do mean a collective our. So they're not just ours, they're yours, they're always yours. But we get to share them together. And so I think that we all play a very critical role as being educators in that experience. But as always, we want to be able to make sure that we're doing it the right way. And we're not perfect, and we will never say that we're perfect at doing this. We've been doing it for a long time, and it doesn't necessarily mean that we know everything. So, the one thing though that we would always say, of course, is that, you've had your student for a long time living at home, and there's a good chance that your student is probably starting to grow and change in some ways that we actually might know a little bit better because they are here with us. And so they're having conversations with us, they're interacting with us, we're seeing them at their best, we're seeing them at their worst. So that's why the partnership, I think, is so critical in terms of how we are able to work together and to come together to make sure their needs are being met. So, Jonathan, I've always told families that it's always important that when your student calls you and says, that things aren't going well and they are, just because, again, things may not be going well for them, that, when they stop, kind of pouring out, their concerns and what they're struggling with, that you have to ask them a couple of questions. And one of the things that you have to ask them is, are you venting, or is there something that you would like for me to do? Because I've seen too many times where parents and families don't ask the question, are you just venting? And so the student has just poured out all of this information because they're talking to the people that are their people. They're talking to their families, the people that they've known all their lives, potentially. And and what they're doing is just venting. They just want to tell someone. And what we also have is some families who, as soon as that venting is done, they receive the information. And then the next thing they do is they make a phone call to the university. And again, not to say that we don't want to talk to the family and that we don't want to help the student, but what we also know is that in a lot of those scenarios, the student was actually just venting. They actually weren't necessarily looking for you to jump in and to get involved and engage. So asking the question, are you venting? And what would you like me to do for you are really, really important, because they might say, yeah, you know what, I really do need your help. I really want you to give Dean Hughes a call or shoot him an email to kind of ask questions. And, and then that works perfectly. But again, we want to be able to give our students some agency to be able to be equipped to be able to manage what it is that's happening here. And again, we're preparing them for life here at Virginia Tech. And so it's not just from orientation to graduation, it is actually orientation to graduation and beyond. So again, we want to be partners in this process, and we want to be able to be helpful, and we would like to be able to have you be helpful to us as we support your students. But, let's have a good relationship here where, again, we're able to kind of tap into what they're needing, what they would like us to do, when they want us, and us as collective, us as in me and the team and Jonathan and all of our folks, and certainly you all, when do they want you to walk beside them? When do they want you to kind of get behind them? And when do they actually want you to be in front of them and to get in their way a little bit? And because that's the same strategy that we're using, but we're in it together. We're looking forward to the many opportunities that we have, of course, throughout this school year to be able to do this, because we're all doing it new and differently together. And so in whatever ways that we can learn about how we can do it better, please let us know.
Well, Dr. Hughes, thank you so much for your time this evening. Families, thank you for tuning in on your Friday night. Tomorrow, you'll see Dr. Hughes and I give a welcome for Family Weekend right at 9 a.m. And then we'll do another Q&A about health and wellness with some of our partners in the well-being areas. And then we'll do another Q&A all about campus programming and how your students can get involved this year. And so we hope that you will tune in and ask all of your questions, because we really are here to help. And as always, go Hokies.
Go Hokies.